I think one thing I've learned looking back is whether we are in relationships or searching for a relationship, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? And then ask ourselves, am I all of those things? And if not, we work on those individual attributes. And again, we'll attract what we are into our lives.
Hello, and welcome to the 40 Drinks podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie McLaughlin. You know, sometime in the years around our 40th birthday, many of us start to feel what I call like some part of your life that had been working really well no longer does, and you don't know what to do about it. I know that was true for me, and I fought against it, which only made it a messier process. But having 40 drinks with 40 people over the course of a year helped me escape the influence of that ick. On this podcast, I welcome you to tap into my stories and experience, as well as those of my guests, to help you emerge from your own ick and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes we made along the way. My mission is to make it common cultural knowledge that there is a transition most of us face around age 40, and then showcase so many versions of that transition that every single person approaching or recently turned 40 with dread in their heart knows that they are not alone. Before I jump in today, I wanted to say I'm sorry for taking a little bit longer than usual to share this amazing conversation with you. My chronic fatigue took me down recently, and I had no choice but to comply with my body's directives. But today, I'm thrilled to share my conversation with Dhruv Sethi, who survived a toxic and dangerous first marriage and a messy divorce, which had profound effects on his trust in women. And after serial dating for a while, he met someone he really liked, but she dumped him. A couple of years later, it happened again. And he finally realized that he couldn't blame all his romantic results on the women he was with. The constant in these situations was him. Hello, Dhruv. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You are coming to me from jolly old London, right?
I am, yes, indeed.
All right. So I love taking these conversations and making them universal by talking to people on different parts of the planet. This isn't just something that's American. This is something that's really much more universal. This concept of transition sometime around age 40.
For sure. I agree with you. Doesn't matter where you are. Many experiences have similarities.
Yes. And that is one of the things that I have been so blown away at. You know, we're like 100-ish conversations into this podcast. And while there are so many unique stories and so many interesting stories, there are themes people fall into. And then even among the themes, there are common threads that are just consistent around these stories. So yeah, I'm very excited to jump into yours. So why don't we start where we normally do, which is tell me a little bit about your early life. What is the prologue to your midlife transition? What sets us up for the person who you were in your early 30s?
I think I have to go back to my infancy, actually. So I
Oh,
was
wow.
born in India. So my heritage is Indian.
Yeah.
But at the age of 6, my family moved to Sweden in North Europe, in Scandinavia. So that's where I grew up. So pretty much grew up in Sweden since the age of 6. And then somewhere in my early 20s, I came to London, UK, to study. The main prologue is that coming as an immigrant family to a country like Sweden, there are two very different cultures. And the culture that I came with from India was very much get your education, get a job, get a career, and get married, have kids, very mechanical in that sense. Whereas in Europe, it's less mechanical. There's a lot more freedom in that sense. And people growing up can make their own decisions. Whereas in Asian and Indian cultures, parents sort of make a lot of the decisions for you. So I was following that mechanical trend, if you like, that was laid out to me. And then moved to London to study, and then eventually started working in London as well, and was very much on the hamster wheel. And then it was time to get married as well. And somewhere in early 30s, that's when I married for the first time. Okay. And a lot of things changed because that marriage did not work out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that leads me into my midlife somehow, where I had a change of thought, a change in how I was as a person as well. I'm happy to talk more in detail about that.
So let's talk about you're in London, you're working and you're dating and you meet this gal and you guys start going steady and moving down the path of relationship. What was that like?
That was good. I think for me, I liked it. The idea of being in a relationship and someone to share your life with, I quite liked that.
Mhm.
At that point, it was somewhat new, I would say, and I was learning a lot about feminine energy, women as well. And I'd learned lessons before, but this
Mhm.
was somewhat different in many
Yeah.
ways. So it was a nice phase before marriage, of course.
How old were you when you met your ex-wife?
I would have been 30, 31.
Okay.
So yeah, before her, I was just maybe dating
Yeah.
short-term flings, but then when I
Yeah.
met her, it was more serious.
So you date how long did you date before you got married?
1.5 years, but
Okay.
most of it was long distance.
Oh, where was she?
So she came to London for an exchange program from India, and that's
Oh.
where we met. We had some common friends, but then she was in London for a few months, and we got to know each other during that month. And she went back, and then for the most part of that 1.5 years, she was in India. So it was very much a long distance relationship in how we got to know each other. And I would say that was probably the mistake, because long distance relationships aren't really relationships. And getting to know somebody over the phone is not the best way of getting to know somebody. So that was probably the big mistake that I made in the relationship side of things.
Yeah, I had a long distance relationship in my early 30s as well. You can get to know somebody to an extent when you are on the phone or visiting for short visits, but it's very different to being with them on a day to day basis and seeing. We talk about social media as being the cultivated versions of our lives, the shiny parts and the good parts. I think when you're long distance, you can downplay some of your issues, faults,
Yeah.
quirks until you're in the same place for an extended period of time and you can start to get to know people, how they deal with success, how they deal with failure, how they deal with frustration, how they deal with anger, how they deal with the bills, how they deal with drudgery, all those things. You can't always get a great sense of in a long distance situation.
Exactly. You need to see how people react under stress and to work in a team as well. But you don't
Yes.
see that in a relationship. And that sort of takes me back to the prologue that I was describing earlier as well. So I had to live up to a certain mechanical roadmap. I was in
Yep.
my early 30s. It's time to get married. And so that was a milestone that I had to hit. So even
Yeah.
though I was seeing some red flags, and I'm sure if you ask her, she'll say that she saw red flags in me.
Sure.
But because I had to check that box, the box of getting married, you sort of gloss over some of those red flags because you're in that regimented roadmap of your life.
Yeah. Were your parents, was your family giving you overt pressure? Were they telling you you needed to get married? Or was it just pressure that you had internalized? I'm curious about that.
Great question. My parents are very cool. I mean, they did not give me any overt pressure, but you're absolutely
Okay.
right. So it was internalized pressure, which I had grown up with, essentially.
Yeah.
So not blaming anyone at all. I mean,
Of course.
at, at, at the end of the day, it falls back on me. So it was very much internalized pressure. But sometimes you have to go through bad things in life for you to sort of put the mirror in front of you and realize what these issues are.
A
So yeah,
hundred
great
percent.
question.
Yeah. So you were feeling the power of the shoulds.
You could say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We've been dating for a year and a half, so we should get married. Yeah.
It's time. It doesn't get better than this, or maybe it will get better than this, but it's time. Time
Yeah.
was dictating my decision, you could say.
What kind of red flags were you seeing while you were in a long distance situation?
I was seeing sudden bursts of anger, and then sometimes an inability to work through a particular disagreement, maybe.
Hmm.
And it's not always about being right or wrong or winning or losing a particular disagreement. It's about the correct answer is always between two extremes. It's about how
Absolutely.
you get to that middle part.
Absolutely. I always used to say there's your story and there's my story, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Exactly.
So you get married, and I'm guessing she moves to London, right?
Correct.
Okay. And how was the beginning of your marriage?
It did not start well, to be
Oh,
honest with you. No, it's straight off the bat, it was pretty bad. These sudden bursts of anger, I think they became more prevalent because now we're married.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's okay. It's sort of okay for her. And then it's becoming more and more frequent. So it started off really bad. And, within 6 months, we separated.
Oh,
So we had not lived together. And you could say that it was the first time that we were continuously with each other and experiencing the mundane together for the first time after 1.5 years.
yeah.
And that's when you really start seeing, okay, doesn't seem to be the person that I thought I was getting married to. And I'm sure she'll say the same thing. We
Yeah.
were not right for each other.
So sudden bursts of anger. And I think when you and I first talked, the anger was not just it bubbling up out of her. You said she was physical about it as well.
Yeah, she was very physical, very aggressive. Now, I don't have a medical certificate to prove this, but I
Mm-hmm.
would say that she had bipolar disorder because she was taking some medications and sudden bursts up and down, extremely aggressive, and then all of a sudden very meek and weak, and then all of a sudden getting angry again, up and down in the span of a few seconds. So I
Oh,
would say it was bipolar disorder. And that's
yeah.
something she did not tell me before marriage.
So that's something that, had you guys had more time together in one place, you might have seen before.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
before you took
another
that next
major red
step.
flag was highly possessive. Even if I was to speak on the phone with my brothers or my parents, or if I just stayed behind for a drink after work, that was a problem for her. Highly possessive
Mm.
personality as well.
Yeah, that's challenging, especially when it's not like you wanted to talk to all your old female friends from school, your brothers and your parents. I mean, that's pretty
Exactly.
disruptive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. When you first reached out to me, you said, when you talked about your divorce, you said you could have either been dead or in jail.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
In the middle of the night, she could get aggressive and physical whilst I was asleep. Um, Once she took a knife and pretended to cut herself, not me, but it was quite easy for her to pick up the knife and start threatening. So, and in that extreme level of anger that she would express, you just don't know what could happen sometimes.
Yeah.
So, I sometimes fear that she could really seriously harm me whilst I'm asleep or even potentially stab me. So,
Yeah.
that's where the dead comes in. And where I say I could potentially been in jail as well. Now, I did say that she was physical. I refrained myself. I didn't hit her, but I would grab her arm and really shake her because I didn't want to hit her. But I know as well that, press the wrong buttons enough times, a man will hit. And
Yeah.
I was feeling that, that's something I need to do. I need to show some level of physical strength as well because she's damaging my self respect. But I still never hit her. And I mean, as things are, I could have hit her, could have hurt her, and I could have ended up in jail.
Yeah. So how far must you have to be pushed to think that you would do those things or to act in those ways?
Yeah, I don't know, but I do know I would say, I mean, every human being has a dark side. And I know somewhere I have that dark side as well. Like I play a lot of sports, especially you could say masculine aggressive sports like soccer. And I've played soccer all my life. And there are times when it gets very physical, you hurt the other person, you yell, you say bad words. So I know I have that side. And it's always
Yeah.
about, raising that level incrementally. And if you raise it incrementally enough times, you get in the red zone. So we all
Yes.
have that dark side. And somewhere I've seen that dark side, especially when I play sports. But you're right. By default, I'm a pretty chill guy. I
Yeah.
like a beer every now and then, watch TV. I'm a normal guy.
I've talked before about some of the terrible romantic relationships that I had through my 20s and 30s. There were situations, I'm thinking of one boyfriend in particular who I became so frustrated. It was such a bad fit, but I didn't know that at the time. And I was committed to making it work and loving him until he could love himself or whatever. But it was such a bad fit. We would get in these fights and I would get so frustrated that when I was driving, I remember him being in the car and I would be driving and I would jam the accelerator and just like scream and drive really aggressively out of like frustration, like to the extreme of like, here I am, I have nothing I could do. I remember him yelling at me, and it's not a great way to be using a car, but when you're in those situations, it's like the frog in the water, right? You turn it up so slowly, you don't even realize until you look up and you're absolutely not yourself.
Absolutely. And you want to take whatever you're doing to the extreme. So driving a car, maybe you're chopping vegetables and you start chopping really fast. You just, whatever you're doing in that moment, you take it to the extreme. So you don't
Yeah.
know if somebody is chopping the vegetables and holds a knife in their hands, what is their definition of extreme in that moment?
Yeah. Wow. So you only stayed together about 6 months and then you separated. What did the end of that marriage look like?
It was very dirty, very messy divorce.
Yeah.
A lot of back and forth, but I was very fortunate. I had amazing solicitors. I had to get a barrister as well. And I don't know if you've ever used a barrister, but you shake their hands and that's a 4-figure invoice right there just to shake their hands.
Oh, yeah.
It was an expensive affair, but I'd say it was a good experience for me because somewhere in that process, it took about a year and a half, a messy divorce. But in that process, I learned a lot about myself actually. And that is, I was
Mm-hmm.
getting so frustrated and I wanted justice and I wanted to make sure that she had to pay me, my parents, whatever money we spent, and all the guests that had come with high hopes, she had to pay. I wanted my revenge, and I was frustrated, and all
Mm-hmm.
that back and forth. On the last day in the court hearing, my solicitor, the main solicitor that I had in the UK, an older gentleman, an amazing man, and an amazing solicitor, he just said, when I was really upset and angry, he just said, Dhruv, sometimes following principles is an expensive affair. And the penny dropped. I was like, yeah, what principles am I talking about? Number one on my list should be my freedom, getting out of this court case. So
Right.
when he said that, penny dropped, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to ask for money from her. I will pay her under X, Y, and Z conditions.
Yeah.
And that's when I got my freedom and I was out on that
Yeah.
very day.
Wow. On that day. I had a situation many years ago when I first started my marketing business. I had a name for the business and did all the right things. I went to the state and I registered the name and we got a website and we printed stationery. This is many years ago when you still needed stationery and all these things. And maybe 9 or 12 months after I started my business, this woman came after me and she said, "You can't use this name. It's too close to my name." It wasn't really close to her name, but I might want to move into the area that you're serving using my name. It was a real weird thing. My attorney said to me, "Listen, you're in the right. You did all the right things. You checked all the right boxes." He said, "But how much is it worth to you?" He said, "I know her attorney, and her attorney is like a dog with a bone. So we could fight this, but how much money do you want to spend on it?" I had the same thing happen to me. It was like the actual expenses were a couple of boxes of stationery. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, it's just not worth it.
And in that instant, did you feel sort of, if I was to draw an analogy, it was almost like you saw your ego in front of you in a way, figuratively speaking, and
Mm.
you had to make sort of a decision that I always thought I was this person. These were my principles. And then in that moment, you sort of see another person and maybe that path is better somehow.
I would love to say that I got that level of insight at that moment. I didn't. I have had that level of insight at later junctions. But no, at that point, I was very frustrated. I was angry because just like you, I was in the right. I felt that the resolution was very unjust. And that is one of my triggers, that sort of injustice piece of like people getting away with things they shouldn't be able to get away with and things that, you know, even though I'm right and doing all the right things, somehow I still end up paying the price or something. So I did not have that clear picture that you did at that moment, but I got there. I got there for sure. And honestly, 17 years later, my business is still around and hers isn't. So, okay, you know,
Yeah.
my path has been great. And frankly, the name had some connection to actually, interestingly, that same old relationship. And my mom helped me with that as well. She said, "Are you really committed to that name? You know, it came to
Yeah.
you through this old relationship that's over and gone. Like, what about
Yeah.
just letting all of that be in the past?" And that helped too. So,
Fantastic.
okay. So you are now free. You've gained your freedom and you're in your early 30s at this point. You're still like, 32, 33, right?
Yeah, 33. We got married at 33. Then by 34, I was officially
Okay.
divorced. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're just coming into your mid 30s now. That relationship kind of shook your confidence, though, right?
Yeah, shook my confidence. And I think it took me down a very dark path as well.
Okay.
I stopped
Mm-hmm.
trusting women. I didn't want to get into a long term relationship with women, happy to have flings or meet them, talk to them, but I just couldn't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through a period of maybe 4 or 5 years or so where I was just dating. I'm not really sure why I was dating, but I was dating and wasn't really getting anywhere in that sense.
What did it feel like to not trust women?
Looking back today, it was
Mm-hmm.
almost like I had closed a part of me. We're three brothers, always played very male dominated sports like
Mm-hmm.
soccer, and went to an engineering school as well. So a lot of male friends, surrounded by men
Yes.
everywhere, pretty much.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I've closed that part of me where I'm meeting women, hanging out with women to such an extent that I'm only thinking a certain way. Looking back today, I feel like I closed myself to a lot of different perspectives.
Yes.
But at that moment in time, it was a great thing because I didn't feel that I had to get into a relationship. There was no pressure to do so. Just hanging out with my buddies. That's all that mattered.
Interesting. So the marriage and then the marriage falling apart sounds like the thing that kind of ejected you from your mechanical, I would also call it linear framework for life.
Great observation. And you're 100% right.
Yeah.
So, and
So,
then there was no pressure from parents or society. They knew he's been through a rough time and it's just like a weight off my shoulders.
yeah, that's so interesting, right? Because now you can just kind of go around and, sort of shrug your shoulders like, well, I did it your way and like, look what happened. So, what did your way look like? I mean, talked about a lot of focus on yourself, the male energy of your world. Did you know at the time that you needed healing? Or when you closed that door off, did you just kind of close the door to the hurt as well?
I closed the door. I didn't think
Okay.
I needed healing. I thought, no, I was right. Justice,
Mm,
justice this. She lied to me.
yeah.
And I just closed myself off. I didn't realize I needed to change. I mean, at a metaphysical or esoteric level, we attract who we are. So
Yes.
in our relationship, somewhere, however much we love them or hate them, in some ways, they're a mirror of us. So
Hmm.
I can say whatever I want about my ex-wife, but somewhere we were quite similar as well.
Yeah.
So I did close myself off dating and dating, but eventually I did change because I think it was maybe 2 years after my divorce, I met somebody who I really fancied, dated a little bit. She broke off with me, and I got double bitter, like even more bitter than what I was
Mm,
before. I was like,
yeah.
it just fortifies what I believed in.
Yes.
Then I went back, just dating short term, on and off, on and off. I didn't want anything with anybody. Then 2 years after that, I met somebody, and that was 2020. I fancied her, and she broke off with me as well. And at that point, the penny dropped again. I was like, hang on, something is wrong with me. It's not all these women, it's me.
Yeah.
And the attention just turned 180 degrees back onto me. And or that's actually when I realized that I have to heal. There's something that I'm not doing right. And that's where my healing process started. That was 2020.
These two women, 2 years apart, who broke up with you, was there a consistency in why they broke up with you?
Yes. The consistency was that they they had their hearts closed, just like me. Like I said, esoterically, we attract what we are. So my heart
Yes.
was closed, and those women, their hearts were closed as well.
Mm.
I would say the lady from 2020, she made an attempt, but she was still quite closed off. But she tried. I think she was trying to open up, but I
Yeah.
wasn't able to reciprocate in the same way.
Yeah. It's so much easier to see it in other people when we see it like in our friends, and our friends will come to us and say, my boss is such a jerk, and then they change jobs, and my boss is such a jerk, and then they change, and my boss is such a jerk. And it's like, at some point there's a common denominator here, and it's
Absolutely.
not the boss.
Yeah.
Hi, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute. You know, with more than 100 episodes under my belt now, I've been thinking about how I can continue to make the show better. And to do that, I sincerely want to engage more with you, my listeners. I want to say explicitly that I want to hear from you, and I want you to feel really welcome to ask me questions. Ask me anything you ever wanted to know about turning 40, about this 40 transition, and about what my guests have shared of their stories or I've shared of mine. I also want to say out loud, because I don't do it enough, that if you want to learn more about the 40 transition, please consider getting on my email list, where I explore the topic in different ways than I do here in my guest episodes. And if there's anything you'd like to hear more of on the 40 Drinks podcast, I'm open to your suggestions. My biggest goal is to be a resource for those of you going through this transition. So if there's something else that might be useful to you, please let me know. You can do all of that on my website, 40drinks.com, and spell out the word 40. There's a contact button right at the top of the page if you want to drop me a line, and there's a subscribe button as well if you want to get on the email list. And finally, if you're enjoying today's conversation, hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might appreciate this exploration of midlife's twists and turns. Your engagement helps me to continue to bring these amazing stories to light. All right, back to the show. It's so much easier to see it in the people around us, whether it's friends we're having conversations about these things on, or even just visibly being able to see it in the people around us. And it's so much harder to see it in ourselves, especially if we're not at a point in our lives where we're thinking about being introspective, where we're thinking about growth, where we're thinking about what we want our future to look like. Actually, again, one of the commonalities of this transition is, instead of making it all about everybody else out there and all the ways that they are wrong, we finally start to kind of like unzip a little bit and go, well, maybe I had a little bit to do with it. Well, and that just cracks open enough that we can then keep going down that path to see what my part was.
Yeah. I think one thing I've learned looking back is whether we are in relationships or searching for a relationship, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? And then ask ourselves, am I all of those things? And if not, we work on those individual attributes. And again, we'll attract what we are into our lives.
And it's that same thing with the old adage of, you can't wait for somebody else to make you happy.
100%.
You have to be happy yourself with yourself in order to attract the person that's going to boost your happiness, complement your happiness, be happy with you. But making that somebody else's responsibility is really a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and it's not somebody else's responsibility to fill a void that you have within yourself.
Yeah,
it's much more fun if there's no such codependency and you're enjoying yourself like in a very calm way. Someone said once, love is not infatuation. It is actually a stable, a healthy high. So when we experience these peaks and troughs, that is really not real love. That is more like we're hoping that they're going to save us or solve some problem.
Like I was trying to do all those times, solving problems, filling voids, carrying somebody else's baggage, all of those kinds of things. And it just never worked. No matter how good I was at it, no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I turned myself inside out, it just never worked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what kinds of things were you starting to learn about yourself when the penny dropped, when you were broken up again by the second woman?
I wanted to open up my heart a bit more. I sort of started very intermittently showing a bit of love to her, but then I was closing off a little bit. And then I just said, what am I fearing? It doesn't cost to show people love. And it doesn't cost if I give a random stranger a compliment. And in our family, we are 3 brothers. And poor mother, she's the only woman.
Right. Yeah.
But we forget that she's a woman at the end of the day. She's a mother. And how many times do we actually go and just listen to her, chat with her? So I started doing those things and just became a bit softer, became better at listening. I think one of the most tangible things, the best things I did, and probably for your listeners as well, one of the best things, best advice I can share from my experiences, you have to become a very good listener. And one way of doing that is when somebody's speaking, just breathe. It's very tempting to sort of interject and make your point, but you'll get your time to make your point. Just breathe and just listen and pivot off what they're saying. There's something to learn there. And if you don't get a chance to say your piece, that's fine. It wasn't meant to be. Just breathe. And that is a very important skill, I think, in life.
I agree with you 100%. If all you're doing is preparing for what you're going to say next, you are missing so much of the conversation. You're missing, and you may not be missing words, but you'll miss meaning, you'll miss nuance, you'll miss essence.
Absolutely. And our
Yeah.
subconscious records every second of every day since we were in our mother's wombs. So there's so much there, and our subconscious is speaking to us. Even when our conscious mind is trying to find a solution, it may not, but the subconscious will sometimes bubble up in our dreams or when we're waking up or in that drowsy state when we're just about to fall asleep or wake up. It'll come to us. But the most important thing is that you're listening.
Yes. I actually had that experience just this week. We all get earworms, right? When we get songs stuck in our head. One day this week, I was in the morning, I might have been making breakfast or something, and all of a sudden, two lines of a song from the 80s came into my head. When I was like, I'm a child of the 80s, so I was rocking out to these two lines in my head. And all of a sudden, I realized what these two lines actually said. And I was like, oh, it's not the song you want me to hear. It's just the words in those two lines. They actually
Yeah.
mean something in my life right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. And it's interesting when you have those moments because I don't know, I can't be the only one who actually gives myself like a little pat on the back. I was like, oh, good girl. You heard that. You didn't just sing the song and like rock out to the song. You actually heard what your subconscious was trying to tell you with the words of those couple of lines.
Exactly. And when the subconscious makes you realize that, it's actually when the subconscious or God or universe, whatever you believe in, believes that you've now reached a higher level of maturity. And so your subconscious picks that up. So basically, you should indeed pat yourself on the back because you've achieved that higher level of maturity.
Yeah, well, good girl. Okay. So, what else are you starting to do and learn as you're on this process? So, you've started to listen more openly when you're talking to your mom. But what else is happening? What other things are you doing?
Other things, so meditation was a big part of one of the biggest changes I made, and it's one of the best changes as well. Meditation, waking up early, trying to wake up before the sun, meditate on empty stomach, yoga, a lot of yoga was there as well, and then just going to gym, getting in shape. I always feel that when in life you don't know what your next move is or your next step in path, without thinking, you should try to get into physical shape.
Mm.
So going to gym, yoga, whatever that is, and then ideas start popping up in your head. So I'm doing those things, but meditation was a massive change, and it was the best changes I made as well.
How did
And
you
I'm
start?
how did I start? I don't remember if there was any particular event or incident, but waking up early in the morning and knowing that you had that time, just focusing on your breath, breathing. That's how I started. But I also noticed that my mind is racing. It's just racing the whole time when you're
Yeah.
trying to meditate. And then eventually I learned that I don't have to fight it. Just let it race. Just don't have to focus on anything. Just let it race whatever direction or however fast it wants to do. Just don't be attached to any of the thoughts.
Yeah.
And whatever emotions are bubbling up, just let them bubble up and you can deal with them through your breath. And then over time, I became better and better at it. And I was much better able to segregate my thoughts, separate them out, and get the emotions out. And what I noticed is I became even more attractive to women because not only was I listening a lot better, but I had that calmness about me in my eyes and that poise, because I learned to manage my thoughts, control my thoughts. And I did notice it was quite drastic, actually. A lot more women wanted to be with me, hang out with me. And then I, as well, was enjoying female company so much more because, 90% of my network are men. But all of a
Right.
sudden, I'm enjoying spending time with women, getting their perspectives and the way they joke. Humor is different. I'm just enjoying life a lot more.
Yeah. Meditation is always something I've been interested in, and I've not been able to make a regular habit of it, although I'm trying again recently. The thing that I always found interesting about it is that the racing, it's the monkey brain. If you can just let the monkey tire itself out, it actually does quiet down after a while.
Absolutely, it does. But the monkey brain has a purpose, and it's going to bring all these random thoughts into your head. But you will notice, as long as you keep breathing with deep, long breaths, the monkey in your brain has a purpose. And what it does is emotions start bubbling up. And the reason it's bubbling up is because it wants to be let out. It wants to be released out of your body. So just let it. I'm going to take a very extreme example here, but I'm taking an extreme example for illustrative purposes. And that is, you're meditating, you've got that monkey brain. Let's say in your head, you see a car crash or a murder, something at that extreme. Obviously, that's going to bubble up some feelings, right? But the whole thing is about letting that feeling out and release. So feel it through. And then you will notice over time, and the next time you meditate, the feelings or the thoughts are getting milder and milder and milder and milder eventually. They're just feelings that want to get released.
Yeah. In the fall, I took a course. Irene Lyon is her name, and she teaches a healing, nervous system resetting kind of class. And it's wonderful. I'm actually still making my way through. But one of the things she talks about with emotions and feelings like that, it's like holding a ball underwater. And you always have to work to shove it down because it wants to come up. And the other thing about these thoughts and these feelings and these emotions is that they can actually get stuck inside of us, get trapped inside of us. The classic book, The Body Keeps the Score, right, by Bessel van der Kolk. And it talks about how by doing this, we actually end up with physical ailments due to holding these thoughts and feelings and emotions inside of our body.
Yeah, absolutely. I attended an energy workshop 2 weeks ago, and the healer was very proficient and was able to read my chakras. And in reading, he pointed out that there are stuck emotions from when I was 8 years old and 27 years old as well. And I was like, what? Why? What happened then? So I went back after the energy workshop. I was meditating. I was just thinking back, where was I when I was 8? Where was I when I was 27? And I was like, you know what? I just gave it a bit of thought. And they were significant years in my life, like 8 years. I moved to Sweden when I was 6 years old. And at the age of 8, I started getting more and more of my memory. And I distinctly remembered then that I was trying to fit in, but I wasn't able to fit in. And my younger brothers were too young. I couldn't take them out, hang out with them. So I was alone in the playground, just trying to fit in. And there was stuck trauma from then. And there was a particular incident that happened at that age as well. And so I worked through it, got it out of my body, I believe. And now I have to work through the things that happened when I was 27. And just at a high level, at 27, I was at a very low because my friends, my peers from university got high earning banking jobs, whereas I was just starting out my career so far behind. I felt inferior to them. And since that age, that trauma has been in my body since 27. So I have to release that. So we've got a lot of stuck emotions since childhood.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I love how you said when you were 27, both of these examples are so interesting because they are not capital T traumas, right? It's not a car accident. You didn't fall off a bike. You didn't get hit by a bus. And yet they are stories that we tell ourselves. They are negative feelings that we hear or feel, and we internalize them.
Yeah.
They stay with us and they become the chink in the armor or the misstep in the stone wall that can actually affect other things down the line and how we behave and how we perceive the world. And
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
think once we reach our midlife, like I'm 41 now, we
Mm,
become a lot more open to these things. But when we're in our 20s and 30s, we've got the alpha energy in us, right? We don't
yes.
want to change. We just want to achieve our career goals, this and that. But when we
Yeah.
reach that 40 mark, we sort of calm down and the horizon broadens.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens at 40. We start to, in the 15 or 20 years before the onset of this transition, the major aspect of our adulthood is just our independence from parents, schools, things like that, right? We are independent beings making what we think are our own choices, but a lot of the
Yeah,
times we are following a lot of prescribed pathways, whether it's familial or societal or cultural. And so there's a lot of head down, there's a lot of, dig, 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 work, 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 push, push, push. And then there comes a point where we pick our head up and wonder, like, what have I been working towards? And
yeah,
why aren't I happier? And is all that work and this is where I got, these kinds of things that are really kind of uncomfortable questions.
absolutely. And those are the questions I've been asking myself as well, especially when COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
I went to university. I'm making a decent salary, decent job, and they're telling me to stay at home. They're telling me I can only exercise once per day, go out once per day, only buy this much food, all of that. They're telling me what to do after all that
Mm.
education. What have I done with my life?
Right. Right. After how hard you worked to get where you were.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Tell me about your 40th birthday. What'd you do for your 40th birthday?
It was very unceremonial. It was nothing special.
Okay. All right. No big celebration.
But I was dating a girl then, and I didn't want anything special. She insisted, but then we settled on she took me to a show, a West End show.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we just spent the day together. She took me out. We were around London. I'm not one for big presents or big surprises.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me what it looks like now that you have opened your heart, and I'm hearing from you, you feel like you've done a lot of healing of that early relationship. What does it look
Yeah.
like on the other side?
I'd say, yeah, a lot more open, much better listener. I feel I don't take things personally the same way.
Mm,
I'm not making assumptions about people. I'm less judgmental. Everybody has a story. No, we shouldn't judge anybody. If nobody has walked a mile in anybody else's shoe.
hmm
I believe in the esoteric a lot more as well, like a law of attraction, like we can attract what we want in life. That
hmm
is so much more prevalent in how I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And yeah, much more open with my money, much more generous. I wouldn't say I was stingy before, but maybe I was very tight, a bit tight to some extent. Now I'm
Mm,
less so, like a lot more freer.
yeah.
And my brothers as well, like my relationship with them is a lot better.
And how has that impacted your romantic life?
Being open and less judgmental and all of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Are
yeah,
you seeing a different outcome?
yeah, absolutely. It's much easier to be in a romantic relationship. And the outcome is I don't feel anybody would say that I am needy or I put pressure on them. I think women generally feel very safe and comfortable, secure with me. They enjoy my company.
Mm.
It's more relaxed in that sense. And I really appreciate the feminine perspective on a lot of things as well. Life problems, like it's such a different perspective. And I really embrace it and welcome it.
Are you looking for a different outcome from your romantic relationships at this point? I mean, it sounds like you're not at the point where you're in a serious relationship. Would you like to get married again someday? Is that something you'd like to do? Or tell me where you are looking forward now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to settle down. I want to have kids. So no more short term relationships. So now on the dating scene, I'm very happy to not meet somebody if I just don't feel it.
Yeah.
It's okay, but I'm not putting any pressure on myself or the other person. But the ultimate goal is yes, I want to become a father. I want to become a husband. I want to be the head of the family, take care of the family, and yeah, I want that.
And so dating takes on a different kind of character when you know what you're looking for from an
Yeah.
outcome, right? I mean, it's less like dating and more like interviewing, I think is an interesting
You
way to say it, right?
you could say it that way. I wouldn't use the word interviewing, but just maybe a dance. You could say a dance. How do we
Mm-hmm.
dance together? Like, are
Yeah.
we? Is it good banter? That is just easy. It's
Yeah.
effortless, and then we go on. But maybe I should step it up a little bit. I'm 41 now, so
You have plenty of time. If there's
we men
anything
have
I've
time.
learned from these conversations, it's that you have plenty of time. And I didn't meet my husband until I was 40, actually. And we got married. I think I was 44 when we got married. So, and there are plenty of those kinds of stories too. So you're not late. You're right on time. You're
Yeah.
right on track.
Absolutely. And one more thing to add there as well. I don't think I had this brain, this level of maturity. So if I had a
Right.
kid just 5, 10 years ago, I don't think I would have been as good of a husband or a father. But today, with this mind, this head, I think I can be the best I can be.
I love that. And that's part of the journey is coming to the point where you feel prepared for what's next.
Yeah.
Where, a lot of times when we do things when we're young, we're base jumping off buildings and unsure whether we put our parachute on.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. I
Yeah.
just wanted to add one more thing to one of your
Yeah.
earlier questions as to
Yeah.
what else has changed. I used to read books before, but I read a lot more books now, and then
Mm-hmm.
attending energy workshops, these kinds of things. I mean, the esoteric interests me a lot, so I'm doing a lot more things that
Yeah.
interest me. Whereas before, it was very much career-related things. I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
banking industry, so very much of those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
now I do things that really interest me.
And that makes sense, right? Because when you were younger, you were building your career and you
Exactly.
had to go to those events and you had to do those things. And, whether it was, seminars or workshops or conferences or just after hours and drinks and happy hours, you had to do those things to put in your time. And now that you've built that side of your life, now you're focusing on the other side. And different people come at it in different ways. Some people do a better job of building both of those things together as they're younger people. I didn't, but I have talked to people who did a better job of that. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me now. You're following your own interests and building that spiritual side of you, your internal experience.
Exactly. And also any business projects or businesses that I wanted to start and I hesitated before. Now I planted a few seeds. I can see some seeds germinating, and there's a lot more ready to take on a lot more risk and really try different things out. Open my heart in that sense, open my heart and my mind, I would say.
I love it. Okay, so you've done all of this work on yourself. What are you now doing with all of the knowledge that you've gained for yourself? What are you doing with it?
So I figured there must be a lot of other men in my situation as well who are discovering themselves in their late 30s, 40s. And so I'm sort of documenting my journey in my podcast, which is called Midlife Masculine.
Mm-hmm.
You can find that on all the major podcast platforms. But essentially, it is for men who've reached an inflection point in their lives, their midlives, and they're looking back and they're asking themselves, what did I achieve? Is there more to life than what I've done already? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's an opportunity for men, listeners, to get a lot of knowledge. So I'm a student in my own podcast where I bring experts, share all types of knowledge, esoteric, contemporary, ancient knowledge, wisdoms, so that men can get a broader perspective on things and perhaps take that risk that they want to take or make a change in their lives.
I love that. It is precisely what I am doing here with my podcast as well. So many podcasters say the same thing, right? It's like, I went through this, I learned something from it. I can't be the only one. So, what if I share my story and then gather others to share their stories so that we can support the folks that are coming behind us, so that we can give them the tools that maybe we didn't have at the time?
Absolutely. Your mission, Stephanie, is very noble as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And what a wonderful time to be alive that we have these tools and we can use them. What I mean by that is in my day job, I own a marketing agency, and For years and years, I did presentations on the history and evolution of marketing. For so long, these tools were so expensive and so difficult to use and so rare that, that's why we had mass media back in the last century, right? The TV commercials and all of that stuff. Those were tools that most of us couldn't have access to. But now it's been so democratized that here we are, we can create communities and we can support those who are going through things like what we went through.
It's a great time to be alive.
I love it. I'm so happy for you that you've come through this turbulent period into a place of really feels like stability and steadiness and openness. And I'm sure that all of that is going to serve just to blossom in front of you.
Absolutely. No, thanks for your kind words.
Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening today. I love it when I'm able to really highlight the universality of this midlife transition. And when I talk to people in different countries and across oceans and on the other side of the planet, and their stories line up with some of the stories that I hear closer to home, it just helps me really find peace and comfort in the fact that this developmental stage is really pretty universal. Though there was a strong cultural element that many of us don't have, Dhruv, like so many people, was following a prescribed and very linear recipe for life that led him to a place that didn't fit, which for him had very dangerous immediate repercussions. I know I've experienced that myself in relationships where I turn into somebody that's not me. And I've seen friends and family in similar situations where a bad match results in somebody really turning into a whole different human being. And for Dhruv, there were also very sad long-term repercussions in that he really lost his trust in women as a species. And it took him a long time to find that again. And that element of it being everyone else's fault, too. That's another big piece that I see during this transitional period. Before we have this burst of growth, before we're ready to take accountability for our own part in our situations and the situations we find ourselves and in the pickles we find ourselves in, it's really not everybody else's fault that we end up in these pickles and these situations. I know I've experienced some of that myself too with some of my friend relationships, things have fallen apart. And for a long time, I blamed everybody else for things falling apart and for friendships ending. But when I'm really quiet and sit with it, I realize that I played a part in it as well. So being able to take that accountability and really sit with that helps you to understand these situations better. Not only what happened, but also your part in them. And that way, it can help you make adjustments moving forward. Another one of the lovely lessons I pulled out of this conversation was when Dhruv said, whether we're in a relationship or searching for a relationship, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? And then we ask ourselves, am I all of those things? Oh, God, I love this. His contention was that we attract what we are into our lives. And I've heard it said so many other ways too. Your vibe attracts your tribe, right? Your vibration, your personal vibration is what attracts things into your life. And I just like the way that Dhruv said it. Am I all of those things if I want a happy, healthy, stable, loving relationship? Am I, in fact, happy, healthy, stable, and loving? Because if I'm not those things, then what I attract into my life is not necessarily going to be those things either. It was just such a lovely perspective on this situation that so many of us find ourselves in when we find ourselves in relationships that don't fit or aren't fulfilling or are not happy or just don't feel right. We have to really look inward before we look outward. All right. Next week will be the final episode in season 5, which means that after it airs, I'll take a couple weeks off to rest and rejuvenate and continue to improve the podcast. But before that, next week, you will meet Karen McMahon, whose 40 story is about a high-conflict divorce with 2 very small children, and whose surprise 40th birthday party was the final straw for that marriage. Karen gets real and gets raw in this conversation, and it's one I'm very excited to share with you. So, I'll see you next week. The 40 Drinks podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.